Iran, it is being claimed on Newsweek, is threatening to resume the war. But if we look carefully at what is being said here, I wanted your comments on this because I think it's important. Major General Mohammad Pakpour, commander of the IRGC, said forces are fully prepared to resume combat from exactly where it had stopped. And this was during a meeting with Iran's army chief, General Amir Hatami. What is the situation right now with regard to Iran in war preparations? We've heard many times since the cessation of hostilities that Iran's fingers on the trigger, that the next war could be Israel's last.
The Iranians are preparing themselves. They know that the Israeli regime is dishonest and deceitful, and so is the regime in Washington. They are deceitful. We saw that last time around. The United States, by its own admission, was pretending to negotiate with Iran, but it was secretly preparing for an assault against Iran, and therefore, that's very good reason why the Iranians should be prepared for anything. At the same, also, we see that the Israeli regime, the Americans, they tore up their own ceasefire agreement in Gaza. The Israeli regime, on a daily basis, violates the ceasefire in Lebanon. They just murdered a husband and wife yesterday, leaving a small girl as an orphan. We saw what they did in Syria unprovoked, even though Jolani or Shara was kissing the ring. They attacked Syria unprovoked. They actually, as I see it, and I said this yesterday as well, that I believe that after there was an agreement between the Israelis and Jolani, and the Turks were mediating, and in Azerbaijan and elsewhere they had negotiations. The Republic of Azerbaijan, another close ally of the Israeli regime, and the Israelis gave them the green light to go into Soeda. And my belief is that when they went in, the Israelis sort of ambushed them. The intention was to strike them, to let them come in and strike them. And I think what the Israelis are trying to do is they're trying to balkanize Syria. So when you see them carrying out unprovoked attacks against Syria, unprovoked attacks against Iran, violating the ceasefire in Lebanon, a ceasefire that they requested during the war with Hezbollah, they requested the ceasefire, and then the same with Gaza, then obviously the Iranians know that the regime can attack anytime it wants, and the entire West will support it. You will not see condemnation. They'll say the Israeli regime has the right to defend itself. That's what the Europeans will say. That's what the Americans say. No matter what they do, who they kill, what sort of massacres they carry out, no matter how long the genocide or the Holocaust in Gaza continues, the Americans, the Europeans will say Israel has the right to defend itself. So Iran is preparing itself for another round. It doesn't mean it will necessarily happen, but the Iranians are working based on the assumption that it will happen.
There's a lot of hubris coming out of the United States, the collective West, but particularly, and usually the one with the most hubris is Israel. And here's the Jerusalem Post, what they are saying. The Middle East post-Iran era has begun, no matter how hard the Islamic regime denies it. So I just want to show that this is the Jerusalem Post. There have been talks about how, not only has Iran been weakened by the first round with Israel, that it launched this war of aggression that Israel and the U.S. launched, but that everybody else is weakened as well. What is your assessment of the overall situation? Because you mentioned Syria. It is not a good situation in Syria, of course. But what's your assessment of this broader situation as Israel thumps its chest and says, we've actually defeated everybody and Iran has already lost?
Well, I think that the only arena where the Israelis scored a success was in Syria. That was a tactical victory. The Israelis and Erdogan and Biden and the Qataris, of course, they collaborated together to bring down Syria. And they were doing that since 2011. And if Syria hadn't fallen, if we didn't have the dirty war since 2011, the Israeli regime would be in a much more difficult situation today. That's obvious. So it's not the doing what happened over the past few months. It's what's been going on since 2011. Unfortunately, many people across the region and beyond the region, they were fooled by Western propaganda. They were fooled by oil-rich, gas-rich dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, and Erdogan, and they were pushed towards sectarian. They supported these groups basically based on sectarian grounds. Many. And now we're seeing the result. What we were predicting back then is that ISIS and Al Qaeda, which is supported by the West, which is backed by the West, which was started by Obama, Timber Sycamore, for example, and which was being pushed by U.S. proxies and allies in the region. It's not in the interest of the Syrian people. But some people who support and who oppose the United States in Gaza, they were supporting U.S. policy in Syria for well over a decade. And now we're seeing the results. We're seeing this so-called revolution demolish the country. Everything that we predicted would happen is happening. If you recall, after the overthrow of the Syrian government, I said that this is not going to work well for these people and those people who are supporting this Al Qaeda and ISIS regime. And now we're seeing the results. We're seeing how a Takfiri ideology is going to marginalize the overwhelming majority of the people. Different minorities, moderate Sunnis, Sufis, everyone is going to be marginalized by these people. But their backers, they willingly close their eyes to this reality because they've been indoctrinated, through sectarianism. Unfortunately, some people, their hatred for the Shia and Iran, and this is something that I don't usually talk about, but their hatred towards Iran and the Shia far outweighs their animosity towards Zionism. And it comes from Ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and these people who have this takfiri ideology. And they, since the revolution in Iran, this ideology has been used as a weapon. It used to be very obscure, but it has been well funded, and it spread. The Americans also, of course, used it in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, but it was also used to sort of, how should I put it, to contain the revolution in Iran because it was anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and it supported the press. Those were the ideals of the revolution. So they used Wahhabism and Salafism and Takfiri ideology to create hatred towards Iran, and that hatred since the 1980s has been growing and has continued. So many people supported this sectarian Takfiri group, these as ISIS and Al Qaeda, because they just wanted Assad out, even though the Iran's support for Assad had nothing to do with his sect. Iran has huge problems with Baku because Aliyev is an ally of the Israeli regime. But it is a Shia country, and he is, I assume, at least in name, a Shia. So that for Iran, that's not the point. The point has always been that wherever the empire, the Western Empire, and the Israeli regime are pursuing regime change in Western Asia, then you can be sure that it's not in the interest of the Palestinian people. Whether it's in Gaza or the West Bank or in Jordan or in Egypt or in Lebanon or in Syria, you can be assured that the Americans and the Israelis know what they're doing. And what we're seeing today is the destruction of Syria. And Iran is not present. Iran has not been present for a long time now. but the situation is getting worse. And the images coming out. And so what the Israelis have done is that they, and the Americans, is that they've brought this extremist group to power, this Takfiri group, and that has created an incentive among many to seek foreign support. And so the Druze, some of them, not all of them, not even most of them from my understanding, they sought support from the Israeli regime, which is treasonous. There's no doubt about that. But that gave an excuse to the Takfiris to go out against the Druze people. And the images coming out of that city, I mean, there's one clip which I saw where this Takfiri soldier said the first Druze woman that they give, he's going to give as a gift to this sheikh who was standing, or this person, this old man who was speaking out on in the video before him. This is the sort of, this is Takfiri. I mean, it's no better than Zionism. It's supremacist. It's sinister. It sees anyone who doesn't think like themselves as subhuman or worthy of death, worthy of subjugation. And so this Takfiri ideology is ideal for the balkanization of Syria. It is ideal for the balkanization of Syria. And that is why they pushed for these Takfiri groups in Syria. Remember, Jake Sullivan said on February the 12th, 2012 to Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. The same Al-Qaeda that we're told carried out 9/11. The same Al-Qaeda that they use along with their regional allies, especially Qatar, to destroy Libya. So these, and then we have, the evidence is ample. There's a huge amount of evidence. We have John Kerry, who was then the Secretary of State after Hillary Clinton. He said in a leaked audio in the UN building to the so-called Syrian opposition that we allowed ISIS to advance on Damascus to put pressure on the Syrian regime. But the forces opposed to us, the Russians and Iranians and so on, they blocked this. So yes, the Israelis have had success, but I don't think that the Israeli regime has had any success elsewhere. They've had no success in Yemen. They've had no success with Iran. I think it's very clear that if they were winning against Iran in the war, then why were they seeking the ceasefire? And Iran, by the way, initially rejected the ceasefire. It wasn't a ceasefire, it was a cessation of hostilities. But Iran rejected the cessation of hostilities. The Israelis went to the Americans went to a regional, a neighboring country. They put it to Iran, Iran rejected it. And then the Americans gave concessions to Iran. If you recall, I think Trump said this. I think he wasn't supposed to say this, but if you recall, Trump said during that when the cessation of hostility was taking place, he said that Iran can sell its oil to China. I don't know if you remember him saying that.
Yes, I do. And it was pretty circumspect in the sense that the announcement that there was going to be like secondary sanctions on Iran was very unrelated to the 12-day war, but quote unquote the 12-day war. But he just said it right at toward the end. But continue.
Yeah, there were other concessions as well, right. And which since I'm not exactly certain about these things, I don't want to go into it. But this is what Trump said himself. So after that, so some of the concessions had to do with apparently with other issues too, but regional issues. But in any case, as well. But in any case, the point is that Iran was the side that ultimately had to be convinced for a cessation of hostilities. If that's the case, then what sort of victory is that? Or in Yemen, it was Trump who capitulated. If you recall, initially Trump said that Ansarullah, they gave up and they've come begging to end this. And I think he even used the word capitulated. But then it turned out that it was the exact opposite, that it was the American regime, it was the Trump regime that capitulated. In the case of Hezbollah, this is a contentious issue.
Yeah.
First of all, Hezbollah made huge sacrifices for well over a year to draw forces away from Gaza. They made huge sacrifices. And if it wasn't for Hezbollah, who knows what would have happened to Gaza, especially during those initial months. So Hezbollah made huge sacrifices, but ultimately, who sought a ceasefire? It was the Israelis. It was the Israelis. Hezbollah still exists. It is armed. It is prepared. But I don't think that the Israelis can call that a victory. And with regards to Gaza, I don't see that as a victory. I see all of these as failures. Yes, they've murdered many people. Yes, they've murdered many people in Lebanon. Yes, they've murdered many people in Yemen. Yes, they murdered many people in Iran. Of course, they brought Al Qaeda and ISIS to power in Syria, but they have not won. If they uh, and the region, by the way, Danny, is changing. The region is now seeing an Israeli regime backed by the Trump regime that's out of control. And that is changing the mentality of many countries that are close to the United States in the region. They're fearful for themselves. So countries which were collaborating with Americans, like Turkey was a part of this dirty war. They supported these Takfiri groups. They've been behind them all along. And they are responsible for the destruction of Syria alongside Qatar. But Turkey knows that they are vulnerable. Saudi Arabia knows that it's vulnerable. Everyone knows the threat of Netanyahu, who simply wages war whenever he wants. He can carry out airstrikes on Syria out of the blue. He can tomorrow. Would you be surprised if he's bombing Beirut? Of course not. If he starts bombing Iraq tomorrow, would you be surprised? No. If he wages another war against Iran, would you be surprised? No, no one would be surprised. And would anyone in the West condemn him? Would he be sanctioned? Of course not. He can do what he wants. And that is something that is turning the region away from him, even among those regimes and entities that are affiliated to the Western camp. I don't see victory at all as an Israeli victory. I see an Israeli regime that is despised globally, despised across the region, that has delegitimized itself. And by the way, and this is something that I've said to a couple of people, I don't know if you would agree or not. This whole Epstein episode that has made such a, has such an impact on American society. If it wasn't for the last 21 months of genocide by the Israelis, the Mossad Israeli link to this affair would have still been would have angered many Americans, but I don't think it would have had the impact that it has after 21 months of genocide, because many Americans now despise the Israeli regime. And then when they see that Epstein was Mossad, and that Mossad, which is a part of a regime that's carrying out genocide and is bombing country after country and slaughtering people every day, this Mossad is basically doing this to American girls, and then through that they're able to have donors and politicians and government officials abide by their demands. That makes Americans even more angry. In other words, if what we're seeing today in the United States had happened before October the 7th, 2023, I think it would have been bad for the Israeli regime, but not nearly as bad as it is now. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the Israeli regime has self-destructed. Netanyahu has destroyed the image and the credibility and the so-called legitimacy of the Israeli regime in the eyes of the world. That is not something that you can calculate in dollars or euros or yuan or any other currency. It's just something that you cannot calculate.
Yeah, very good points. And on that Epstein question, while it falls out of the purview of the channel, my assessment of it all is that very much to what you just said, Professor Marandi, with the image of Israel, the public opinion, especially in the United States of Israel, being so low as it is, this link that Israel has, and of course these major figures who are either being blackmailed or who are collaborating with a figure like Epstein, the anger about this after 2 years of Israel given carte blanche by the United States to do what it's doing, genocide in Gaza, and of course expanding regional war, and the U.S. going deeper and deeper into war as well, angers anyone who's outside of the establishment lexicon. It angers everybody outside of that. And, mentor Glenn Ford, he used to say to me, and he used to say this, he said, if there's one thing that unites people outside of the establishment, it's hatred of the banks. Now we are seeing a hatred of Israel, the hatred of what Israel is doing as being the great uniter. And yeah, the Epstein case and how big that has blown back in the Trump administration's face is definitely a big example of that. Professor Marandi, a question to you though, given this playbook you laid out with the Takfiri, the Wahhabi proxies, the terror groups that have been funded and backed for decades and decades to get to this point of attempting to regime change Iran, and of course conducting regime change all around the region, and destabilizing it for that purpose. Given that that's the playbook, what do you say to those who say, well, then now is the time for Iran to do what it says it can do, which has been to, destroy all of Tel Aviv, send a real strong message to Israel that if it continues down this playbook, that there will be significant consequences. What do you say to people who are right now feeling this way and thinking about this?
First of all, a lot of the people who push this argument and say, why isn't Iran doing more? And I'm not speaking about your audience, but there is a group of people, especially as I said, those people who are professional antagonists towards Iran. As I said, some of them are themselves Takfiri, or they're influenced by Takfiri. They've been influenced by anti-Iranian propaganda for decades, coming from the West, and from our region. I remember just a while back, just a few months ago, TRT of Turkey, they wanted to open up a Persian channel. Then the head of TRT said, I don't remember the words, but he said, we're going to punish Iran, or we're going to hurt them through, basically what he meant was through TRT Persian. Like there's a Holocaust going on in Gaza, but Turkey's focus is on the resistance and on Iran. So this anti-Iranian narrative that has been going on for a very, very long time, and promoted across the region and beyond, that I think we should always keep that in mind when we're looking at the debates going online. The people who are hitting at Iran repeat always, and I see them sometimes in my comments. They themselves are not doing anything about Gaza. They're not supporting. They're not funding the resistance. They're not supporting I mean, even now in Syria, it's very interesting. They speak about a ceasefire between the Israeli regime and Syria. The Syrian regime is not shooting at Israel. They're shooting at Syrian citizens, and their Takfiris are, they're saying that the Druze are, the enemy, and
Did you
all
see the
that.
tepid remarks from Jolani too? Oh, Israel is instigating a little. They're instigating. It's not good, But no fight back toward Israel, which is literally invading Syria.
These people are now saying, no. This is the point. These Takfiris, they're saying, no, Jolani, he's saying one thing, but he means something else. And they also say, like, Mr. Erdogan, he's sending oil to Israel. True, he's doing trade. True, he has direct flights. True, he has an embassy. But behind the scenes, he really means something different. And sometimes they said, oh, so you mean that they're doing what you call tagiyah, which is not the real definition, but I think you get what I'm saying. So the point is that these people who willfully close their eyes to reality, no matter what Jolani says or does, they're still going to defend it. No matter what atrocities are being committed, they will defend it. And no matter what Qatar or Erdogan or others do, they will still support them. And no matter what Iran does for the Palestinian people, they will still condemn Iran. But the point is, or they'll say Iran is not sincere. But the point is that war is a very complicated affair. It's deadly. People die. We had over 1,000 deaths. The Israeli regime, uh, they, uh, it was a, what do you call it? It was an unprovoked attack. It was an act of, it was war, but it was also, Iran was caught off guard. Iran was expecting attack, but they weren't expecting the Israeli regime to carry out a regime change operation. I hate the term regime change because I don't use it for Iran. I always use it for the West. But it was a regime change operation. I think that the military was not thinking that that would happen. So on the first night, we had huge numbers of casualties, and commanders of the armed forces, many of them were murdered. So it took like 4 days for Iran to turn the tide. And then, of course, it got better and better for Iran. But Iran still there was a lot of damage. This is war. And also, Iran has to keep the global South on its side. It wants, it's not as if, many of the people who are watching our show, they would love to see the Israeli regime collapse tomorrow, like apartheid South Africa. They'd love that. So would I. But if there is, the Iranians have to show to the world that's now on Iran's side, forget the Europeans and the Americans, that they're not the ones who are trying to, uh, you know, create tensions in the region. And obviously, the Chinese are worried about oil supplies, right? The Asians, countries across Asia, are worried about the price of oil across Latin America, Africa, Central Asia. So Iran wants at the same time to hammer the regime, but also it wants to keep the global South on board and on the side of the victim and the Palestinian people. So Iran hurt the Israeli regime badly. We all saw what Iran did, especially during the last few days. Almost all Iranian missiles were getting through and striking very sensitive targets. So that's A. The second point, as I said, a lot of the concessions that Iran got are not should not be taken lightly. Right now, if Iran, based upon those concessions that Iran was able to obtain, Iran is able to more easily prepare itself for the second round. And look, Danny, we have to keep something in mind. And I think I think maybe we've discussed this before. I'm not quite sure, but the Israeli regime has weapons that Zelensky could only dream of. The Americans would never give Zelensky what they give to the Israelis. So Iran is facing the best that the United States and the Europeans have. And it's not just what they give to the Israeli regime, it's what they themselves put on the battlefield.
Yep.
Because the Americans are in Turkey using their radar bases, they're in the Persian Gulf, in Qatar. And by the way, I think everyone knows now that Trump was lying. Iran destroyed key facilities in the CENTCOM base in Qatar. But in any case, I think people have seen the satellite images, but and the footage and pictures. So the NATO was behind the Israeli regime. Regional countries were willingly or unwillingly supporting the Israeli regime. We know what was happening in northern Iraq. We know what was happening in Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan. So Iran now, so the Israelis and also the Israelis with Western intelligence agencies support, they had a host of collaborators in Iran that were working against the country. Many of them were among the refugees. We have millions of refugees in Iran from neighboring countries. Iran based in It has the largest number of refugees in the world compared to its population. And of course, we have some of these Takfiri remnants of ISIS and Al Qaeda that have come in and are among those refugees, or are from certain parts of, like parts of Iran itself. And so Iran has had to deal with these. Iran has to also learn how to deal with these technologies that have been deployed for the first time on the battlefield. So Iran now has the opportunity to prepare itself for the next round, which is almost inevitable. And I think next time around, Iran will be much more prepared
Hmm.
because Iran knows what the other side has. The Israelis did everything they could. They hit as hard as they could because this was to overthrow the government, the state. They wanted to decapitate and then bring about what they called regime change, which shows how stupid they are. And it shows how stupid the Europeans and the Americans are because they thought Iran was a house of cards. Contrary to what I've always been saying, that Iran has a high degree of legitimacy in the eyes of the public. And after this unprovoked war, it's gone through the roof. But that aside, Iran also needs to prepare itself for round two. It did win round one, but if it wants to be able to hit harder next time, if it wants to suffer less losses and do more damage, then it has work to do.
What do you make of the reports then of Iran seeking out Chinese technology? In particular, both there were several reports: J-10C fighter jets, which shot down French Rafale jets in the Pakistan-India conflict, and then air defenses from China.
Well, I'm not in the military and I'm not privy to that sort of thing, but without a doubt, Chinese technology is advancing rapidly, and I think in most areas, they're ahead of the United States now. And so obviously, Iran has good which has good relations with China. If I was the Iranian in the Iranian military, I would be seeking further cooperation with China, and China would be seeking closer cooperation with Iran because China is also looking at how the United States has gone rogue. The United States negotiates with Iran, but it's not negotiating in good faith. It's using it to deceive Iran. The Chinese are not fools. They know that the United States, the Europeans, are destroying the rules-based order, the old order which the Americans themselves created after World War II. They're demolishing it, and that makes all countries worried, including China. So China has a vested interest in cooperating further with Iran, and so do the Russians, and so do many others. But I do think we also have to keep in mind that the Iranians have done a fantastic job under 40 years of sanctions in being able to defeat the Israeli regime, which was supported by the collective West and countries in our region. Remember, Jordanian airspace was under their control. Iraqi airspace under their control. Radar bases in Turkey and across the Persian Gulf were being used to help the Israeli regime offensively and defensively. And then the Republic of Azerbaijan. People on the border have said that they saw drones coming in from the Republic of Azerbaijan. And that has angered people a lot, especially people who live in cities close to the Republic of Azerbaijan, the city of Tabriz, that area. Actually, Marand, Marandi means a person from Marand. Marand is very close to Tabriz. That has outraged people. So the fact that under those circumstances, Iranian drones and missiles were able to bring Netanyahu to his knees in that way, I think shows how sophisticated Iranian technology is. But without a doubt, the Iranians and the Chinese are going to be working closer to each other. I don't know details. And some things I think are very long term. But, aircraft, or, I mean, if there's discussion about purchasing aircraft, obviously there are lots of details and infrastructure that have to be negotiated. But the point is that China is very concerned about the behavior of the United States. Everyone should be. across the world, people are concerned. And so that is an added advantage to Iran. And that's why I was saying earlier that for Iran, it's very important for it to be seen as first of all, Iran is the rational actor, but it is important for it to be seen as the rational actor by other countries. That way, countries like China and others tilt closer to Iran. They see the Israelis as run by a madman, the United States run by another madman, but the Iranians being calm, being sane, being careful for the interests of the international community, but at the same time assertive and decisive, and that contributes to better relations with countries like China and other BRICS member states and other states in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and elsewhere.
People who want Iran to accelerate the process of the Israeli regime's demise, it's like adventurism. There needs to be an understanding that it's not, for me, it's not even just making sure that Iran has an image that allows the rest of the world to do business with Iran and to cooperate with Iran to ensure Iran's existential survival. I mean, Iran has to also look at its own survival too.
But also to marginalize the Israeli regime.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Because the Israeli regime in a war with Iran, if the war lasted 22 days instead of 12 days, there would have been more damage to the Israeli regime and more damage to Iran. But that would not end the regime. Right. That's not going to bring about an end. What Iran seeks to do is weaken the regime, show the world that it is not invincible, and that image has been destroyed, because day after day people were seeing Tel Aviv and other cities being hammered, despite the fact that the Americans were there, the Europeans were there, everyone was there trying to protect their Nazi, their Zionist, their Zionist supremacist buddies in Palestine. So that invincibility has been destroyed. The legitimacy of the Israeli regime has been destroyed because they are seen as crazy, they're seen as murderous, they're seen as aggressive across the board, and the Iranians are seen as the rational actors. This helps to mobilize the world. I know some people say, no, this is all nonsense. The public opinion doesn't matter, but I don't see it that way. It is very important for the people of the region to see the Israeli regime as vulnerable. It is important for even regional regimes that are in the American camp to see that the Israelis are dangerous. Because what the Americans and the Israeli regime and the Europeans have been doing for decades is that they've been trying to scare the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Emiratis, the Kuwaitis, the Jordanians, and the Erdogan and others about this big threat, Iran and the resistance. But now people are beginning to, even these people, forget the people on the streets, even these people are wondering, what is Netanyahu going to do next? What is Trump going to do next? If Jolani or Shara, who tries to kiss the ring, he told Netanyahu, he sent multiple messages to Netanyahu saying that our enemies are Iran and Hezbollah. He kissed the ring, but they still bombed him. They told him that he can go into Soeda, and then they bombed him. So when they do that to Shara, who was brought in by NATO, how can the Saudis feel secure? How can Egypt feel safe? How can Jordan feel safe? How can Turkey feel safe? This, I think, is part of what Iran is trying to do. Yeah. It is trying to, through multiple means, corner the United States and the Israeli regime, because we have to think long term. We have to think 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road.